So we're on a series called Wait What? Exploring the unseen and the unknown, and this is actually week 7. So we've studied what Elohim means in the Old Testament, and we've studied what the divine counsel is. We've looked at the cosmology of what God created, both heaven and earth, and how these two coalesce, the places that they do. We've explored the first, second, and third rebellion, both angelic rebellion and human rebellion simultaneously. There's kind of a cooperation working together. Of course, man has usually always been the one deceived into that, but a welcome comer, okay, so to speak. I was going to move forward after last week because we looked at how last week we looked at how in the third rebellion, how everything that happened at Babel, and God distributes, scatters people all over the place. But then He also, we looked in several places in the Old Testament where we looked at how God had kind of divorced Himself from humanity. Basically, what He did, He said, "I've had enough of this. This is 3 rebellions. And you're all kind of congregating together in one place. You're trying to build a city to your own name and a tower to the heavens. You're seeking other things. I divorce you." But in the divorce, there was already a plan to redeem them, okay? And so in the divorce, He, according to the sons of God, the 70 nations, the table of nations, that God had designed the lands and the boundaries and the languages, but He also assigned a son of God, a watcher or an angel or a prince or a principality, whatever term you want to use, an Elohim, over the 70 nations. There's a lot there that we explored last week and a lot more that we didn't explore. But also, God said, my portion will be Israel, which He had to go create because there was no Israel back in Babylon or in the Tower of Babel. Okay, there was no Israel, but He created. He called a man, Abraham, out, and He takes that family, his lineage, to Egypt, and that was kind of the how would you say it? That was the formation of a nation. Okay, that was taking place, and then God takes them out. And so you've got all of this stuff going on, and God's plan to redeem the nations or to redeem the people, the Gentiles, to make them part of all of this. So that's a whole nother story. It would have been easy to jump into the New Testament now and start looking at some of the terminology that Paul uses to describe these unseen spiritual beings, these divine beings that have rebelled or in some cases have not, and what all that looks like, and we will get there. But one of the things that we did a couple of 2 or 3 weeks ago, we just mentioned that the byproduct of the sons of God and the daughters of women was what? One of the byproducts is that we created a hybrid race, and those children called the Nephilim are quite big, quite tall. Okay, they became the giants. This is the beginning part of the giants. Well, we're going to pick up on that today, but before we go into that into depth, there's a couple of things that we're going to do. One is, I want to tell you that next week I'm taking a pause, and we're going to look at what's going on in the contemporary world, because we've been in the ancient world. We've been looking at all this back in the Old Testament, and we got questions. Somebody asked me, they were asking, well, what about the Kandahar giant? Have you heard about him? Anybody heard about the Kandahar giant? Oh, okay. Over in Afghanistan? Okay. So there's a lot of people that think that that's a Nephilim, okay? I'm not saying one way or the other. All I'm saying is we got phenomena everywhere. People ask you about Bigfoot. What is Bigfoot? What is that phenomenon? What about UFOs, or now it's UAPs? Fs, wait, UAP, yeah, UAPs. You know, they got all these different terminology, keeps changing, keeps shifting. But all of this stuff, what about ghost phenomenon? What about all this? So next week, we're going to take a pause on the series, but we're going to relate to what's going on as our culture and our world around us is asking all of these questions. And so I'm going to call it strange phenomenon, okay? I'm not saying that I buy into everybody's answer of what those things are, but what I will say is I believe that there's real legitimate things happening. There is real phenomenon going on. People aren't making everything up, but they might not understand what they're experiencing or what they're seeing or what they're chasing after or anything else, okay? So we're gonna look into that next week. Secondly, I'm going to begin by showing you an 8-minute clip by Dr. Heiser, Michael Heiser. It's titled, Did the Bible Steal the Flood Story? Did the Bible steal the flood story? I'm going to try to help you interpret what he's saying. Some of you may capture it. Some of you may have to go back and listen to it a couple of times to fully grasp it, but we'll talk about it briefly. Okay? Let's watch this.
Let's say, you're all the same church. And I said, I want you all to write a paper, on why, our worship service is better than the church down the street there. But you're not allowed to tell me anything that the other place does. Yeah, they're going to make their own assumptions about that. Now, I want to show you something. Her comment was that a culture is going to make certain assumptions about what common knowledge is. Like if you're writing a flood story, there's going to be elements in there that everybody should just know. I mean, there's going to be some unique elements in there too, and that would take us back to, okay, if you're using the raven thing, that's probably not like in everybody's story. Water's probably in everybody's story. But the raven thing is a little too narrow. And so you had to be looking at that. You had to have some reason that was useful to you. Okay, we'll come back to the usefulness and reasonable. I want to show you something. I did not have you read this. And I'm going to show you two things, I think, tonight. And I've given both of these to John, and we'll put these online. But this is from a book here, From Babylon to Baghdad, Ancient Iraq and the Modern West. And the first article, but the second item here, The Genesis of Genesis by Victor Hurwitz. Hurwitz is a cuneiform guy and a biblical studies guy. This is from, it's either Biblical Archaeology Review put this out or the Biblical Archaeological Society. So is the creation story Babylonian. So he's going through all this stuff, and there's our buddy George Smith. We can lay all the blame at his feet, for a lot of this stuff, and then Dalish is going to come into the picture. But he goes through the different story elements, and then he gets to Lambert. There's Lambert's article. All told, Lambert sees the connections between Genesis 1 and Enuma Elish as relatively few in number. Again, you've read the article, so that shouldn't be news to you. But he also notes something else. Many of the parallels between the Babylonian poem and the Bible are as common throughout Near Eastern literature as to be insignificant. There you go. That's the point. Common knowledge. That's a legitimate thing, even back here. As recent scholarship is making clear, simplistic comparison between Enuma Elish and the biblical tradition, as if the Bible were directly dependent on Enuma Elish and it alone, is patently untenable. In other words, it's nonsense. And yet there's clearly some kind of relationship. Then he talks a little bit about Dalish and Smith, and he has this observation. He starts looking at, let's compare.
Okay. Just so you know what's going on here, because there's some verbiage that we're like, what is he talking about? He's talking about different ancient creation myths or stories compared to the one that we say we believe as Christians from the book of Genesis. That one chapter in there, the Genesis of Genesis, is like, Genesis means what? Beginning. So we're talking about the beginnings of something. And so we know that the book of Genesis is about the beginning of creation and mankind and all those things. But also, what we're looking at is he's talking about the genesis of the story itself. How did it come about? And we have competing creation myths out there. And that's what he's comparing right now. The story that we believe in, that we put our faith and trust in, is not the oldest creation story out there. The oldest creation story goes back around in the place of Babylon, the Mesopotamian era period, which is modern day Iraq. Okay? And so the written down story that's the most ancient that people look back to is that it can be called a myth, it can be called a story, and we can just explore what we mean by myth. It's all made up and make-believe? No. It carries truths, it carries values, it carries things. But, so we've got these different myths, and what he's getting ready to show us is that the Mesopotamian, let's see, it's called something Genesis. I forget the word. Oh, I have it written right here. Let's see. The Eridu Genesis and the Enuma Elish are both creation myths that come out of Babylon, okay, that come out of Mesopotamia. And though they have different things, they also have a lot of stuff that is very common to our story, okay? And so what people know, archaeologists or Christian historians or whatever, what we know is that there was a common understanding. You can imagine before things got written down that the way the world, everybody, humanity, whatever, wherever nation you were living in, we got these stories about how this all got started. And you can imagine the stories get changed around in different places, but they have a lot of commonality. This is what he's talking about right now. And we'll let him finish up.
Mesopotamian stuff to other Mesopotamian stuff. The author of Enuma Elish is deliberately attributing to Marduk and Babylon acts ascribed to other gods and cities in other myths about the same subject. The author is stealing the thunder of these gods, undermining them in favor of Marduk. So what he described is Hurwitz makes the point that, if you compare just the Mesopotamian stuff, here you have an old text and the hero god is, Enlil. But if you go into Babylon, the Babylonian period, which is later, 6th century BC, all of a sudden it's Marduk. And the Marduk story looks a lot like this older one. So it isn't just those two. It's more than two. As you acquire and translate more flood stories, or not flood stories, but, flood or creation, whatever it is here. His article's wider than just the creation stuff this week. You begin to notice that the real agenda here is not, we're so dumb we can't come up with a story. I'm so glad we have a library so I have something to write now. I'm going to steal this guy blind and put my name on it. That is not the agenda. The agenda is to use the material theologically. So what the biblical guy is doing is pretty much the same as what everybody else is doing. But no one is thinking that one is dependent on the other because they don't have something to write. It's all about religious and theological messaging. Now, having said that, again, it reflects a political theological competition over primacy. So if we say that, I want to go to the key question here. Well, do I even have it at the end? I'm just going to give it to you because I don't know if I have it at the end exactly. Here's the question, and I hope you get the point right away. If I'm a Hebrew, an Israelite, a biblical writer, and I want to write a creation story. And I want to give credit to Yahweh as the creator, both for my audience and also as sort of a smackdown to our theological and religious competitors. How can I possibly do that without borrowing? Think about that. How would you do it? There's no way you can do it without dipping into the material. It would be like me assigning you, let's say, you're all the same church, and I said, I want you all to write a paper, on why, our worship service is better than the church down the street there. But you're not allowed to tell me anything that the other place does. Like, how am I supposed to do that? I've got to be able to dip into what they do and say to make the comparison. That's the point. It's not that, again, the biblical writers' heads were so empty and the Israelites alone are so stupid that they can't write anything down. The point is, because they have the agenda they do, they must do something with the other material. Sometimes it'll be a thought. Put that in my own words. Sometimes it'll be a specific word or phrase or an item, because they want their readers to hook mentally back into the thing that they are comparing to. If they can't use the material, there's no way to do it. It's just not possible. Now, if you're thinking that reframes entirely the whole relationship between biblical material and the comparative material. And this happens not only with Bible and Babylon, it happens within Babylon, competing city-states. People are used to doing this. This is how you do theology. This is how you do polemic. You must dip into the other material, or else you got nothing. You got nothing to say. You got nothing to work with. So it's not one's intellectually up here and the other ones are like the Three Stooges. Okay, no, there are no stooges in this picture. There are people who know exactly what they're doing and why.
Did you get that? Some of it, maybe? Okay. Let me see if I can simplify this just a little bit. We got events that go back in history, all the way back to the beginning, let's say, okay? So what's an event? Creation is an event, right? And it's broke down into many events, right? Many creative acts in creation. And then we have rebellion is an event, right? What else do we have as an event? Flood's an event. Yep. Okay. Now, all of this, as soon as it happened, there wasn't somebody sitting right there at creation. God, you just made all this. Let me write it down and send it. No, there was nobody to write that stuff down, right? These stories just carried on through history in what's called oral tradition. Okay? People remember it, okay? And they talk about it. Like, remember when? Now, we're way out here, Babel is an event, and then God intervenes and scatters everybody. That's events, right? Okay, now they're nations, I should say. Now we got nations out here, and we've got angels or sons of God or princes, whatever, over these nations. Okay, they rebel. Okay? Now, if you have somebody that's just sitting there, a scribe, getting everything perfectly right, and you just got one creation story, then okay. But what you got is everything scattered. And these angels also, even though everybody carry on in their history, they carry bits and pieces of this. We know that there was a creation moment. We know that there was these things happening, a flood. It's in everybody's history. You start reading, I've got the 7 oldest creation myths in the world right here. And then you got many, many more. I got a list of them, okay? And you go and you read their stories and you find that many of them answer these kinds of questions. How did it all happen? Why are things the way they are? But some things they have in common and some things they have different. I suspect that when these princes over these nations rebelled again, and they presented themselves as gods to the people, to the Gentiles, that they're Elohim again, right? And so we've already looked at that kind of stuff. They're going to change the theology of what all this means. And that's why you can call it a myth. When he said that, he said, the myth is not about just carrying some bits and pieces of stuff. They take the myth into the theological direction they want to go. So if it's a Babylonian creation myth, it's going to have the theology of that, who the god or gods are and what role man plays and all that kind of stuff. So the reason why I say this is because the point he's trying to make about drawing from the same pool and comparing things is Dr. Heiser, it just opened my eyes. One of the things that he says is that Genesis 6, everybody wonders, why is Genesis 6 there? It just seems out of place. It seems odd. It seems like here's this story of the sons of God, mating with the daughters of men, and then they have these Nephilim, and it's just like, and then we move on to other stuff, and we don't really hear about them. We don't, all this other stuff. We have all this other material that speaks to it kind of outside the Bible. Okay, that's one thing. He has argued for this, and a lot of the world has stood up, and the Christian world has stood up and said, wow, you have a good point. And he wasn't original in it. This stuff has been, he's building on the work of many, many others. But here's what he says, and I have been trying to process this for a while. He says this. He says that Genesis 6 is in there because it is not a polemic. It is I just lost the word. It is a response to the creation myth coming from Mesopotamia. One of the oldest. The world is looking and saying, it must be the way the myth, that must be the way the Babylonians or the Mesopotamians are looking at their creation story and their theology. And he's going, wait, you've got these multiple gods. You've got a polytheistic system. You've got gods doing all this other stuff. And he's saying, no, these are truly Elohim. They are God, small g. They are angelic beings that crossed a line that they were not supposed to. And he's giving the writer of Genesis is giving a response to what the rest of the world is looking at and trying to explain it. I didn't do that as well as I wanted to. But are you following that? And it's like, oh my gosh, yes. Because what are they coming out of? What is Egypt coming out of when they come out, or the Israel coming out of Egypt? They're coming out of multiple gods. Egypt has the same deal. It has a creation, has a flood story, has all these other gods doing all this other kind of stuff. Now he's trying to bring some truth and some reality because all of this is messed up. Okay? Not all of it. Some of it is common knowledge. Okay? So you have the events. People might all know the right events, but the theology of it can be very different. Okay. All right. For whatever that was worth, that was really meaningful to me. So I wanted you to have that and let you kind of wrestle with that some too. All right, let's jump in, and we're going to have to fly through it because I don't want you to be here till 1:30. Okay? Gosh, yeah, we're going to skip that. You got your sheet? All right. We're gonna try to fly through this and just get an idea. I want you to see there's several reasons for doing this. One is I want you to see that there isn't just one giant in the Old Testament whose name is what? Goliath. Okay? We skip past a lot of stuff. I want you to see that there is a lot going on here. Okay? I also want you to become, well, no, let's leave it at that. Let's just go through this. Okay, you're going to help me with my first one? Okay, so here we've already been introduced to the Nephilim, but here's our opening passage. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. What days? The days of Noah. In that days when he was living before the flood came, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Now, Nephilim means, by the way, means the fallen ones. It doesn't translate giants in and of its own, okay? It means fallen ones. But we quickly learn that it has the meaning also, it's related to giants. The LXX is what? The Septuagint, 70 writers, Hebrew writers, translated the Old Testament into Greek. And if you go read that in the LXX, it's been translated in English, it's angels. Okay? Giants. I just jumped off. They'll translate it that way. Okay, now, so let's come back to this. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. We know about that. We spent time on that. But then it has this other phrase, and also afterward. And you go, well, how did that happen? If the goal was, I'm just reminding us, and you can ask a question if you have one. I'm reminding us, if the goal was to wipe out not only humanity, because humanity had become so corrupt and so violent that God in his mercy couldn't find anything redemptive in humanity. But the thing that also was at play here was the wiping out of the Nephilim, which was a hybrid race. We don't want that DNA continuing. We want Noah, who comes from a pure line, and if you read the story in Genesis again, you begin to realize how much the writer of Genesis, whether it's Moses or not, I think it's Moses, but whether it's Moses or not, the writer, when he writes this, in chapter 5 of Genesis, he's showing a direct lineage all the way from Noah all the way back to Adam. They want to see a clear line. The reader needs to be able to see that Noah has a pure line all the way back. And then it says this. It says this phrase in chapter 9 of Genesis. And it says that, if I don't forget, he says that Noah was blameless or perfect in his, it doesn't say generation, it says in his generations, plural. Which means, once again, every generation leading up to him was pure. Okay? You have to be careful. You could say we're reading stuff in to Scripture. But I think we're trying not to read in, but we're letting it speak when we haven't allowed it to speak before. And so what we're looking at here is, once again, is that we want to make sure that we're not carrying on that ark any Nephilim DNA. And I know that sounds so sci-fi, so weird and strange and everything else. I'll stop right here and tell you why I initially was drawn to this and began to see it as important. And that was my reading of the early church fathers. what's called the patristics. When you start reading, Clement of Alexandria, if you're reading Justin Martyr or Irenaeus, all of these people that were in the 1st and 2nd century closest to Jesus, they're the ones that were defending the faith. Their theology, their things that they believed, they predominantly speak of this. And I could spend a whole 2 hours with you reading all their quotes. And I've done this. I've done a lot of it, and I'm just like, wow. Why do we want to naturalize something that was supernatural? Because we want to make things palatable to the modern age, I think. But, so we come back to this, and so if God's goal was to wipe out the human race and also to wipe out the Nephilim, and so we bring a flood, and that's how we do it. We make sure that everybody on the ark is clean, so to speak. How is it that we have and the Nephilim were on the earth afterwards? We know why they were on the earth before. We know that story. How did this happen afterwards? And so, just a quick verse. Yeah, there you go. Numbers 13:33, right? When they go into the promised land to scout it out, and they come back with their report, and they said, "There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers." And so we seemed to them. It's like we're walking around we felt like grasshoppers amongst giants, and they looked at us and they thought the same thing. What are these jumping, hoppy little, grasshoppers walking through our land? And so that's the only other place you see that Hebrew word for Nephilim. But we get introduced to that so we know that there's something going on afterwards. So quickly, I will just tell you, I don't know how it happened. There are theories. There are 4 or 5 theories. One theory is that one of the daughters of Noah's sons, the wives of one of Noah's sons, had some Nephilim DNA in her, And I think, well, man, God didn't succeed at his plan if that was the deal. We got to wipe everything out because we don't want to have this again. So I don't buy that. There's nothing that says that. There's theories like the giants were so strong and powerful that Tubal-Cain held on to the ark the whole time, and that Noah drilled a hole in the ark and fed him. Why would you do that? Well, it doesn't make sense, It's like, I have seen some stuff that kind of makes sense to me. When you read this, we think that this was written at the time that it happened. But these words right up there, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. You have to remember, if where I'm standing right now was the present time when that was written, or that was in antiquity, when it happened, he wouldn't have written and also afterwards, because afterwards hadn't happened yet. So when he writes this, we're living a couple of thousand years later, and he is now writing from the perspective of something happened way back then, an event, and we don't know fully how things happened. It is quite possible that probably one of 2 things happened. That is that some sons of God did this again, mated with the daughters of women, or men, daughters of men. But here's what I would say. I would say it was not a new fall. Okay, it wasn't like we got some good sons of God and a few of them go and they rebel against God and they do this, and now they're sent to Tartarus, right? You remember that? Okay. And then we kind of go, well, here's some other good angels. And they go, we like how that all turned out. We want to try it. And so they come in the new era and do the same thing. That doesn't make sense. Okay, you're going to watch and see that this is where this ended. They got wiped out in the flood, and their souls ended up in Tartarus. Okay? Probably what happened was, and this is just a theory, that there's a number of sons of God that are in rebellion. And they don't all rebel the same way or at the same time, but they're already in cahoots together. So some of them get wiped out in the flood. Some of them are still around because they're they're divine beings, they're Elohim. Okay, does that make, okay, all right. So that's all I can say about it. Nobody really knows how it happened again. We just know that it did. And we can see that it produced giants, and that these giants have been a problem for a while now. So let's look at the next group, another clan of giants. So Nephilim were thought to be a clan of, a tribe of giants, okay? The Anakim. So here we go. That same verse, Numbers 13:33, says this: the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. This is the promised land now. This is Canaan. And all the people that we saw in it are of, what does that say? Great height. And there we saw the Nephilim. Some people say Nephilim. The Nephilim. And looky here, he says this: the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. Who are the sons of Anak? Well, we find out pretty quickly that they are a clan of descendants that have descended from Anak, and they are the Anakim. Okay? And look what it says of them. And we seem to, okay, well, we'll see more about what it says about the Anakim. Okay? So I have some verses here for you. You can see on your sheet. We won't read them all off of it. I didn't put these on a PowerPoint. But you're going to see all throughout Numbers and Deuteronomy and several places, you're going to see that all of these Anakim are popping up left and right. Numbers 13:28. Besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The next one, our brothers have made our hearts melt, saying, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And besides, we have seen the sons of Anakim there. That's Deuteronomy 1:28. The Emim formerly lived there, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. The Emim are yet another clan of giants. They may all, in some way, they're branching off of Nephilim, is the way to look at this, okay? Hear, O Israel, let's look at Deuteronomy 9:1-2. Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today to go and dispossess the nations greater and mightier than you, cities great and fortified up to heaven, a people great and tall, the sons of Anakim, whom you know, of whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the sons of Anak? So who were these? They were descendants of a giant, a man named Anak. In Judges, 2 places in Judges, you'll find that he had 3 sons. Joshua's conquest in chapter 11 was to destroy the Anakim. But he left some in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Now, let me tell you a couple of things here really quick. Are we bored? Tired? You wouldn't tell me the truth if I did. Okay. I don't want you to get lost in minutia and stuff like that. I do want you to grasp these things a little bit. So when God tells uh, Moses and then Joshua and Caleb and everybody else, you're going to go into the land. You're going to dispossess. You know, they're going to have to leave. The people that have been habitating in these places in the land of Canaan are going to have to go. He didn't say you're going to wipe them all out, kill them all. He said they're going to be dispossessed. They're going to have to, load up and move out. But he took them around. He said, these I've given to Lot. You'll leave them alone. They are allowed to remain. These people are allowed to remain. These are allowed to remain. You're going to have this area. Some people struggle with the idea that God might be, might advocate genocide on the human race. And there's no question that there are places where there were battles between Israel and other evil nations. But it wasn't a genocide. I'm following a line of thinking and looking for it because God can defend himself, but as a Christian believer, I want to be able to also be able to speak to things, that if I understand things rightly. Is God just going around and telling Israel, y'all wipe them out, men, women, and children, and then you wipe them out the same way? I see where there's a campaign to wipe out these giants. But I don't want that to get mixed up with other Gentile nations and people. And I think there may be a distinction that can be made. Perfectly, I'm not sure. But I'm trying to follow that line of thinking. And it's very relevant today because I talk to a number of young people that don't want anything to do with Christianity because they believe that the God of the Old Testament is, telling people to practice genocide. And they see that, and they look like God's a wrathful God in the Old Testament, and this New Testament God, Jesus, is something different. And I'm like, no, I see them as the same. But anyhow, so this is just a little side note of something why I find some relevance in this, okay? There's a lot of other reasons for relevance. So here's an interesting one. So what does it say here in Joshua 11:21-22? Joshua's conquest was to destroy the Anakim, but he left some in Gaza. Where's that? There's a war going over there right now, isn't there? In Gaza. I don't recommend this, but if you, for its trustworthiness, let me just put it that way. If you check out some YouTube stuff, there are people talking about in Gaza right now about that there are Nephilim in Gaza today, and they may be fighting on the wrong side of that because they're not good, they're evil. Okay, and I'm not going to name names, but some of the people that advocate that idea are known people. It's just like, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose it's possible, but to me, I think that by the time of David, I think that David had wiped out all the giants that had that DNA. Is it possible that there are any remnants somewhere? I suppose. But anyhow, just a side note. You can search that out. You can decide one way or the other. My goal here in this is not to make you line up with every detail of what I say. I just want to open our eyes to some things that we have probably passed over and not seen a lot of. By the way, Joshua left some Anakim in Gath too. Who do you know lived in Gath? Goliath. Yeah, Goliath. We'll see him here in a minute. Okay. Oh, we're right there. It's the very next one. Sorry. Goliath was said to be from Gath, thus making him likely an Anakim. Caleb drove out the Anakim from Hebron. The city was originally called Kiriath Arba. It was named after another giant, Arba. He was also in Joshua 14 and Judges 1. He was called the greatest man among the Anakim. You might think that these are like David's, renowned men, or something like this. But the Bible doesn't describe them that way. Let's look at the third category of them, the Rephaim, or Rephaim, however you want to say it. The Emim formerly lived there in Moab. Oh, we got it right there. Lived in Moab, a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim, they are also counted as Rephaim. Okay, but the Moabites called them Emim. Okay, Rephaim is translated even by, I believe now by the ESV as giants. That's what the word means. Rephaim means giants. Okay? And so if it's ever translated in English directly. So you got Deuteronomy 2, the land of Rephaim. Rephaim formerly lived there, but the Ammonites called them another name, Zamzumium. and they were tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites. Who were they? They were likely descendants of a giant named Rapha. 2 Samuel, you can read those. You can look those up yourself. The Anakim are linked to the Rephaim. The Anakim are also linked to the who? Nephilim, right? Those are your three broad categories of giants. And then you have other clans descending from them, like the Emim. Okay? Now, back in Genesis, way before we're in the Promised Land, I don't know how to say his name, Chedorlaomer or something like that, defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in this other place. He defeated the Horites, the Amalekites, and the Amorites. And so he's knocking out some of the three, those dark are all three different giant clans. Then Abraham then defeated that guy, that giant killer, okay, in a few verses later. Okay, my whole goal here is not to develop a whole big theology for you yet, is just for you to see how much giant stuff is going on in the Old Testament there. Let's look at 3. You know about Goliath, so you can read that on your own. How many of you have heard of Og, King Og? Okay, yeah. So King Og, how do they know he was a giant? 3 clues here. One is that he was considered an Amorite king, and it's possible that the Amorites were also giants. Okay? I put them down here in the possibility category. Read Amos 2, 9, 10 for yourself. A lot of Bible scholars, whatever, that study this more in depth, believe that some of these other places that we don't know a whole lot about, they think were also giant clans. Okay. Secondly, Og was left. It says he was the last remaining part of the remnant of the Rephaim, of the giants. So you have that, and then you have the size of his bed. So when you read this, his bed was made of iron. Who makes their bed frame out of iron? Somebody who unless you're just some wealthy king. You could say, well, he was a king, so therefore. But it's probably for the strength and the support. And it says that the bed of iron was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. And a cubit was typically about 18 inches. That would make Og's bed 13 feet long, and a little over 13 feet long, and 6 feet wide. Can you imagine that? That's trying to think if we got it something that I would know is 13, maybe from there all the way to here. Here maybe, I don't know. Yeah, probably about from here to there. That's a pretty big bed, okay? 4 giants that, I've just got to wrap this up, guys. I'm sorry. No apology needed. Just wrap it up. Okay. 4 giants that are mentioned here too that are a part of actually they're not all, they're grouped together, but as you read the story, they're different battles. And so the first one is I think we have them up there. Yeah. Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze. I was going to try to find out the estimate of that, but some of the stuff that I read that they carried, none of the biggest, strongest men today could wield the heaviness of these things were they not truly much larger beings. So, but I don't remember how big that is. That spear weighed 300 shekels and was made of bronze. And who was armed with a new sword? Okay, great. He thought to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. So there's a giant killer right there. We got another one. Here, if we move it along, there you go. Saph. After this, there was again war with the Philistines at Gob. So this is another war. Then Sabeachah, the Hushathite, struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. Okay, so another battle. Here's Goliath's brother. Now, this is going to be an interesting one. And there was again war with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, the son of whatever, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And you go, oh, how many of you noticed that he says there that he struck down Goliath? I thought, who killed Goliath? David. Yeah, when he was a young boy. And here it says that Elhanan struck down Goliath. Until you look at the same story from 1 Chronicles 25. And there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, struck down, here we have a name, Lami, the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. Everything else is pretty much the same, except now we have a name, and we have the brother of Goliath. So, see you guys. Okay, so what is this? What's happening here? We're going to wrap it up on this. I left this in there. No, wait, there's a fourth one in there. The old dude with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Okay, yeah, there we go. Yet again, there was at war at Gath where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant. So when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, killed him. Okay, one of the things about, giants and hybrids and things like that is you get some deformity. Okay, let's go back to 3. So what's happening here is we kind of touched on this a little bit last week when we were dealing with different text of Scripture. Sometimes you get variants, and the scribes who pass that down are just trying to decide which variant they think fits. And sometimes some will put one in, some will put in the other. And so it's likely what happened here is that a scribe who had dealt with this a while back, for whatever reason, went with Goliath, but then over here in 1 Chronicles, we got the brother of Goliath. Now, if you pick up some If you pick up different versions of your English Bibles, you will find some that you can go to 2 Samuel 21:19, and it will be the brother of Goliath. But it's not in the modern. It's not even in the ESV yet. So it's just interesting that these different variants make their. I bring them to your attention not to make you like, oh, fearful, I can't trust my Bible, but just to be aware that I don't want us to be naive when somebody brings that up to us and says, hey, looks like there's a contradiction here or something. It's like, I want you to be able to answer it. And some of you have actually asked me about some of those things and have asked would like to know more about how the books of the Bible came together. Why are these in there and these are not in there and stuff like that. We may look for a time to explain some of this in a better way on its own. Anyhow, weird place to end. Yeah. Yeah, that is true. The giants are, can be defeated. I would say by the descendants of David, meaning, what you're saying? Are you talking about?
They were defeated.
Oh, by David's descendants,
David
yeah.
And his descendants.
Yeah.
And his forefathers.
Yes, yes. And there seems to be a clear plan to do that. I got to end it here. I'm sorry. I had another little thing. Maybe I'll save it for next week, okay? Like I said, I feel funny here because it's just like, this is not a sermon. You understand? It's just helping us open our eyes to some things. And what happens is the more that you will dig in yourself, you'll start seeing things a little bit differently, okay? And as you're doing that, it will also, I'm hoping that it will equip us to talk about, like, even to be aware of the supernatural side of things. Because, well, we'll just say that we're teed up for next week, okay? So let's close in prayer, and I'll dismiss you. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for how you've protected and preserved your plans for our well-being, for our redemption, and that you do truly have a hope for mankind. You have a desire for every generation. And Lord, whatever this study means, Lord, for each of us, I pray that you would just open our eyes to see not something that's imaginary, but helps us understand your truth. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen? Amen.